The fields of Tallulah are dry today. The only moisture this afternoon falls in a mist from crop dusters. They land empty, fill up, and take off again from a strip right next to the Tallulah Airport. Well, what used to be the airport. In the early 1920s, this was a sleek headquarters for the daring flyboys. Today, you can only find it if you're looking for it. Might there be a story in every dried-out landmark? You know better than to ask. This journey wouldn't be much fun if there wasn't. In 1930, the same group of investors who built this airport terminal in Tallulah built a similar one in Monroe. Now, that enterprise, starting out small as a crop dusting service, Delta Crop Dusting, their operation eventually became highly successful and known as Delta Airlines. But this is the home of aerial applicating, crop dusting, August 1922. This is undeniably an important historic landmark in the history of aviation. I'm Jeff Dewey, and you and I are going on another journey in search of lost Louisiana, but this time we're packing something of a road map. Each year, a statewide organization called the Louisiana Preservation Alliance publishes a list of the top 10 most endangered historic sites. The Tallulah Airport Terminal is on that list. Now, we're going to be taking our cues as to where to visit from that list for this, our latest installment in Lost Louisiana. We'll call this one Castaways. The Tallulah Airport is number 12. Nearby and still in the heart of the Arklamis Delta, downtown Monroe holds number 11. If you're walking downtown in Monroe, you should take a look up. The brickwork on some of the buildings is something sweet to notice. Arched Italian-style windows take the eye back to a stylish past, when the old center of banking and nightlife was right here, along Grand Street, naturally right along the banks of the Ouachita River. Douglas Breckenridge is a Monroe architect and advises the Historic Commission.
These were primarily Italianate buildings, and they were reflections on the Italianate style which arrived in the United States probably about the 1840s, 1850s. I believe Andrew Jackson Downing or some gentleman like that introduced the pattern books from England, originated in England primarily.
These photos are some of Breckenridge's cherished mementos, especially since some of the buildings captured in them have literally fallen to ruin.
If the owner can prove that it's economically unfeasible to keep the building up, then they can tear it down. So it's a pretty big gap in there. And sometimes we talk people into saving old buildings. Sometimes we can't. You know, they literally have the ability to tear them down. We'll be perfectly honest with you, we haven't had so many purposely torn down in the last couple of years. There has been a certain enlightenment in the community towards the older buildings. Most of them were torn down or fell down, 10 years or so ago.
Certainly someone must own these remains of a fine day. Tony Rispoli has recently consolidated his ownership of several of the remaining strips on Grand Street, and far from finding him neglectful, we found him renovating.
We do have some problems here. For instance, garbage collection. It's difficult for someone to move in a building when you cannot park in front of the buildings, nor do you have made arrangements for garbage collection. That is a concern I've had, and I've made my concerns known to both the city and to those powers that may, and I'm not getting very much results. Another problem is lighting. So it's difficult if you can't park in front of your place to unload groceries, to unload laundry, to unload furniture. And so that's one of the obstacles that I'm trying to overcome now. The intention here is to either make a condominium or a commercial type restaurant or a place where people can meet and have weddings, parties, a hall.
And this is the space you could rent overlooking the Ouachita River if Tony Rispoli's dream for the grand old buildings of Grand Street can be made real and renovated.
And they're interesting windows.
Oh.
They're the old wooden windows with the, and both the bottom and the top come down.
Were they busted out?
They were busted out.
As downtrodden as things have looked for decades, maybe we'll soon look up again with appreciation for the brickwork of Grand Street. Down the Mississippi to St. Francisville, for number 9, in no particular order, of the dozen most endangered Louisiana landmarks. In fact, this one has a happy ending.
One of the 300, one of the 350 last call to get the 350 going once, going twice to get a 350 sold at 325 your way.
The sticker with the number on it means this item is for sale, a pair of 1850 urns flanking the entrance to one of America's most intact antebellum homes. A few years ago, items from Rosedown Plantation hit the auction block.
This is Rosedown's waffle iron. Goodness gracious. 175 to 200 for it. Going
From perfume bottles to hundreds of wine bottles, the intoxicating plunder continued for 2 days.
sold at 175.
These were the personal items of the Turnbull family, who built Rosedown in 1835. Scattered now, these fragile remnants had rested safely here for a century and a half. The last private owner had been quietly selling the contents, but this was his last and most public exchange. An older guidebook to Rosedown shows what the Henry Clay bedroom suite looks like. It was made for the White House, anticipating Henry Clay would sleep in it. When he wasn't elected president, the first family of Rosedown bought the whole huge set. A Dallas museum paid $500,000 for the bed alone. Will Mangum worked marketing Rosedown to travel agents before the last owner bought it.
This house was the most elegant house between Natchez and New Orleans. It still is.
And it was the most complete, wasn't it?
It was very complete because the family, the same family that built it, and their descendants stayed living here even during the war between the states and the austere years after.
And they kept everything.
The family was so proud they would not sell the furnishings, they would not sell the land. And so when
But
they...
we're talking receipts for the furniture, everything like that, too,
Yes.
right?
Dwight Landreneau heads Louisiana's state park system, which fortunately bought the house and a tenth of the original grounds.
We went through and we selected those items that we thought that were valuable to the story, as those items that were offered to us for sale, and those items that we could afford to buy.
The Rosedown Baptist Church is on the edge of the property and dates to 1850 or so. Some of its faithful are descended from slaves who worshipped in this very building. When that previous private owner bought the big house, he wanted to tear down their church and fill in their baptismal pool. In 1994, an anonymous benefactor saved the day and freed the church from the threat of destruction.
Congregation prayed for this church to be saved.
I was thinking he was a very bad man.
There's an example of children's shoes over there that are just exquisite kid-like.
Dr. Eva Williams is a textile expert at LSU. She came to shop this auction for things to personally save and maybe donate back to the state.
This is a great example of a piece of trapunto. It is very fine, hand-done stitches in a pattern, and then each of the rows are filled with probably lamb's wool.
A new page has been turned in the history of Rosedown.
Now that State Parks has care of Rosedown, the depletion of artifacts has not only stopped, but people from all over are stepping forward now to return original items. Travel Louisiana's Highway 1 through Bunkie, and just north of town on the left is a beautiful old farmhouse. On the right, across the street, you can barely make out the gingerbread trim of Bennett's store. It's number 8. Sue Eakins is a local historian with a passion for telling the story of Bennettsville.
almost all throughout the South, and certainly through Louisiana and through here, there was a store that was the center of the settlement and the way it grew. Now, this was a very remote section. It was on the Bayou Bluff. It's Bluff here and Buff below Bunkie.
Yeah.
But
The French say buff.
yeah, but the Bayou Bluff was narrow, and no steamships could come in, so they had keel boats and flatboats, and Irishmen manned them. It was not slaves, because Olmsted said that they could use Irishmen. They didn't have to pay for them if they drowned.
Oh, goodness. Eakins convinced the state to erect signs marking the trail of Solomon Northrop, the author of the book 12 Years a Slave, the tragic personal narrative of a free man forced into slavery. The book was widely read and fueled abolitionist sympathy. This is an important stop on the Northrop Trail. And Solomon Northrop, tell me about Solomon Northrop.
Oh, Solomon Northrop was a kidnapped slave who was in this area.
And he was brought down here and made a slave for...
In 1841, he was kidnapped, and he was sold to William Prince Ford, a Baptist minister who had a little plantation right across, well, adjoining this property. Right now, it's just a very readable story. The man that wrote it was a writer, and he wrote well. And he embellished the story with abolitionist sentiment, which was common in that day.
What's the Civil War? What's the wartime?
Awful
What's
here.
the wartime story of this area?
It was totally devastated. The commerce was stopped on the Bayou Bluff, so that stopped the store. And poor Ezra, I have some of his sheets there where he just stood writing his name all the way across them. He must have nearly lost his mind.
South of Alexandria, between Woodworth and Glenmora, there's a hidden sight to behold. What would you say if you came upon a complete turn-of-the-century lumber mill complex in the pine forest, abandoned for decades? Well, like me, you'd say of number 7, what in the world is it?
It's a skidder.
Now, you got to tell me what that is.
A skidder skidded logs. They would cut the logs down, cut the limbs off, and this machine would drag them as far as 1,000 feet on either side of the track.
Since it closed in 1969, Don Powell dreamed of turning Longleaf Mill into a museum complex. Although it's not as well known as such a petrified wonder deserves, tour groups are booking more visits to the museum that time rusted frozen. You're not exactly in deep trouble here, and this isn't falling down. You're fixing it.
We're no longer endangered. We can go to almost to the bottom of the list. I have enough flooring here to complete the floor. We do that with volunteer help. And the new roof.
That's some of the extra roof.
And this is the extra material that was left over, which will go on another building that we're going to work on soon. But this building, which was built in 1910, of course, it's on the National Register of Historic Places. They made products here that are practically unheard of now. Beaded ceiling. 105 drop siding. That was the outside exterior for many, many millions of homes in the United States. They also made bar rail, chair rail, crown mold, shoe mold. This is the molding machine right here. And they would ship it out, and they're little small specialty pieces. But primarily they made what we call dimension lumber, which is 2 inches thick, 2x4s, 2x6, 2x8, 2x10, 2x12.
Ordinary things are most poignant at the Longleaf Mill. At Disneyland, they scatter old train parts alongside the track of the little train. Here, giant rusted gears from the steam era have actually laid beside the track for who knows how long. And it would pull them with cables.
And tongs would hook to the end of the log, or choker cables, and they would drag them up here, stack them alongside the track, and as they filled them up, cleaned the area out, they'd move on down. It was self-propelled. Now, it wouldn't move fast. If you moved it any distance, you'd hook it in the train. Now, there were 2,000 of them made.
And how many are left?
That
like
one?
yours here.
That
no,
one?
I mean, how many are left in the world of
that
2,000 made?
One. This is it. This is the last one of them. We know of a piece of one in West Virginia, but we cannot find any other evidence or anything of one, because in those days, those drums were valuable. The steam engine was valuable.
They tore them apart.
They would tear them apart and sell them and salvage them.
This is the last.
It's the last
this
one
is the
out
dodo.
This is out of 2,000. This is the last one left. But just to show you something, that these people never threw anything away, we've got the parts catalog that came with this machine on display in 1919 is when we got it.
This landmark is haunted by real working hands, full of feeling in the everyday. Being named to the top endangered sites has helped Don Powell raise money for a new roof over the planer mill. So this, too, is a success story in the works. On to Shreveport and number 6. Of Shreveport's many charms, this is one that you might not think of as a tourist draw. But there are enough steam enthusiasts in the world to make the McNeil Street pumping station a better-known landmark. Bob Hopkins belongs to a dedicated group of Shreveporters trying to turn the town's abandoned waterworks around. It pumped its last gallon in 1980.
This is what, a 14-foot diameter flywheel. This is a crank and flywheel pumping engine that was installed in 1921 here at the plant. It's manufactured by Worthington Snow.
At that point, they're still using steam?
Yes, they used steam here up until 1980.
Wow.
This was probably the last operating water purification plant that operated in steam in the United States.
What is the level of local interest as you gauge it?
It's not as high as we would like. We've got a lot of people that are interested, not interested to the point where they want to get actively involved. We've got a relatively small core of what we call fanatics who are really interested and work on it all the time.
To keep it as it is.
Yes, sir. And the city is they back us up very strongly in what we're doing, but they don't have an awful lot of money to put into it, so they're relying on us.
The Red River flows from New Mexico all the way to the Mississippi. It's awfully pretty, but it was never much good for drinking. Silty and salty it is. So the town built these settling and cleansing tanks for the public good. That was 1880. We take good water for granted. Our ancestors 100 years ago didn't take anything for granted. Billy Ivory began work here in the early 1950s at 99 cents an hour. He retired from city water nearly 40 years later.
When I first came to work here, this pump was running, and the steam engine was blue steel, and everything else around it was stainless steel.
Oh, that must have looked nice.
It was just simply beautiful. And everything there, the pipes and everything was brass. And on Friday, I didn't care what your job title was, you polished brass, because all of it had to be kept up. And you just didn't wipe a rag on it, you polished it. It shined, the brass.
It was a point of city pride, wasn't it?
That's right, it's pride. And when I first came to work here, there wasn't any money being made, and I said, what these guys so crazy about this water plant for? But every man here wanted to send the best gallon of water out to the city that he could possibly make, and they made sure that they do their job. And that's the way we're here. And I'd look, I said, I just don't understand why they're so crazy about this place. Now, they all gone, and I'm still here. So it's...
Trying to save it, too.
I'm trying to save it.
This is one of the high-service pumps, one of the first ones that was put in. This was installed in 1900. There was actually another one right over here to the side that was exactly like it. This pump operated until 1980. So you're talking about 80 years of equipment. You just don't see that in equipment that is manufactured nowadays. And that's not only a tribute to the quality of the equipment that was manufactured in
Of the
that
guys
area,
who kept it up.
The guys who kept it up, like Billy here.
This is always the case when it comes to steam power, locomotives, paddle wheelers, anything steam-driven. These Victorian steam-driven pump engines. They were living things to their tenders, as steady as lungs, as powerful as a beating heart.
You have children come here, and I think that's what really keep me here. I had 15 tours that I was giving a tour with 15 students, and boy, they'd be really, really interested. And to see them, their eyes light up when they see this place, and what is this for and what is that for? It actually become a part of you. You want to see it operate, and you want to see it operate right. You want to see it still looking pretty, and it don't do that. It hurts me to see it looking like this. I'm living with it now, but when I used to, before I retired from here, I retired in '90 from the city, and I would bring a crew over here and keep it up. Well, 6, 7 years later, I came back and they had retired it. And when I was here, I'd come over here and I'd turn that big flywheel with water. After I left, there was no one here knew how to do that. That's the reason it was stuck. We had to get it to loose.
We don't decorate engines these days, we hide them. Like something out of Jules Verne, the giant gears remind us that these machines were public servants, that city leaders were proud of industrial contrivances as signs of wealth and progress. 3 of the steam pumps at the McNeil Station are the only 3 left in America of their design. They've all sat idle these 20 years. Since they ran smoothly for 90 years, Bob Hopkins and Billy Ivory say it wouldn't take much more than some oil, a crank, and a few men who know how to treat them, and they might just breathe again. Lost Louisiana, Castaways will continue. At a conference each year, the Louisiana Preservation Alliance announces the winners of its Most Endangered Award. It's not a flattering distinction, singled out because your property is in disrepair, but owners and local preservationists always attend because any attention is good when you're trying to save pieces of lost Louisiana. The chairman of the committee assembling the list is David Campbell.
They're irreplaceable. You can't build, otherwise you're building a Disneyland. You're building a rebuilding of Williamsburg, but that's what it is. They're museums. And I mean, some of these we hope can be a museum in unto itself. Number one, it helps if the present trustees or stewards of the land are interested and committed. And in our case, that's true of most of them. The needs vary. They vary from, as you may have even heard a little this morning, from funds. Funds are always important. But sometimes they vary just to needed publicity, public response.
Our list is culled in no particular order from the group's years of annual surveys. At number 5, we call attention to the Tioga Commissary. Jimmy Lewis wants people to enjoy it again. You're working to clean it for one thing, but also try to make sure the roof is in good condition, so you're okay.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
But you're gonna try to put what in here?
Well, right now we're just really going to try to restore it, and just, you know, a lot of people have, especially my age and older, they've got a lot of antiques and things that are memorabilia from this community, and our kids don't want this stuff, you know. They just don't.
Let's face it.
You know, and so they're looking for a place to put their valuables.
Yeah. Every timbering town had such a store. That's why around here they still call this the commissary. It was the proverbial company store. You know, the sort that paid workers in tokens that could only be spent at the company store.
When you wasn't waiting on somebody, you was stocking groceries in them shelves, you know, whatever.
Mertis Netherlands staffed the commissary in the 1940s. And this was the grocery side?
Yeah, this was all groceries in here. Back up in there was the shoes and material and sewing thread and all that kind of stuff that you use, that women folks use, and men's shoes and shirts.
And then the
whatever.
furnace was in the middle?
Right in the middle of the thing. This was just a little Walmart for Tioga. That's what it was. It was a little Walmart for Tioga. I hope they keep it here for a landmark. It's been here for so many years, and I don't see that it's hurting anything. They could keep it for, I guess, the good it has done.
For a while it was a military surplus store, appropriate because just across town were headquarters for the big World War II proving grounds, the Louisiana Maneuvers. The train has always run through here, hasn't it?
And always. That's lumber train.
And there was a sawmill right here, wasn't there?
That's right. There was a sawmill right over there.
I noticed you were on that list of the 10 most endangered sites.
Right.
Do you feel like that was deserved?
Oh, yes.
You were happy to have that dubious distinction.
Right. As you can see, it has been it's not been used at all in, 15 or 20 years. And if something's not done quickly, it's going to just keep on decaying. And we know that, there are some pilings underneath the building that's got to be replaced and fairly quickly. The paint on the outside has got to be redone, or it's gonna cause the wood to just start decaying. The steps here, have just got, before anyone can be allowed in, we're gonna have to replace these steps. So.
It seems like you're just in time,
I hope so.
Just in
it's
time
a
to get
labor of
people
love
passionate
for all
about
of
it.
us.
That was what I
right.
was going to say, passionate about it.
They're all excited about it because, like I was, we'd pass by here and just think, wonder why someone doesn't do something with this old store.
The latest is that the store was donated to the Tioga Historical Commission, and it stands now beside the railroad tracks in Tioga. The railroad brings us to number 4 on our list of the neglected. In downtown Baton Rouge, something pretty is rusting. Winnie Bird thinks that's a shame.
This is the old locomotive and the coal car, number 333, Illinois Central Railroad, and it actually goes back to, let's see, 1918.
Oh, that's older than the actual depot, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a 6-wheel switching type locomotive built by the American Locomotive Company in July of 1918.
The train assembled here for the Louisiana Arts and Science Museum suffers for lack of funds to preserve it. Winnie Bird hopes landing on the Preservation Alliance's list will wake people to its outcast state.
Now, what we have here is a collection of cars, all right? Not just the locomotive and the coal car, but we have the one that the children like best of all is the old post office car, which is second right behind this.
The fancy office car has a balcony out back. Add some patriotic bunting and you can imagine Woodrow Wilson whipping up the crowds about the League of Nations. It's that sort of caboose.
The office car was very luxuriously appointed. You got it. The CEO would ride there. It was a very fancy dining area for him alone. Bedroom, bath, beautifully appointed. We had to take all of those nice things out because of the leakage and the deterioration of the car itself.
Coming in at number 3 is the happier Shreveport story of Depression-era murals that have been saved. Each of the 4 works is 16 feet tall, physically monumental, and more artistically important than ever. Since they were cast, they've adorned the entrance of the Louisiana State Exhibit Museum in Shreveport. Since 1938 and the opening of the museum, the weather has chipped, hailed, cracked, and pocked the murals of Conrad Albrizio. But now, after a decade of rummaging for funds to restore them, the Secretary of State's office said they needed some TLC.
His first project was, he was invited first as an architect at the Capitol and then as an artist and began working there. And from there, he did frescoes throughout federal buildings in the state.
Elise Grenier is an expert at applying patience. Originally from Baton Rouge, she lives in Italy, restoring rare masterpieces of a now rarer art form, fresco.
It was really his medium, fresco, I think partly because of his architectural background. Because fresco is so ideal for the decoration of architecture, he was particularly adapted to this medium.
And even in moist Louisiana would have survived if not.
Had these frescoes been indoors, they would be in perfect mint condition right now, had they not been exposed to rain sweeping in and to pollution. And we have the same problem in Europe, of course. Tabernacles outdoors in fresco. Those have held up for centuries, sculptures, but this century, particularly with pollution and acid rain, we're having the same problem all over the world. Many people know about the Mexican muralists that began in the 1930s to work in the United States. Rivera, Orozco, Siqueiros, but Albrizio was an American. He worked all over the state and outside of it as well. Black and white and all colors actually working together. Albrizio, in fact, shows people of he was from New York originally, but considered himself from Louisiana because his whole career unfolded here. But he painted many black people with blue eyes, every combination you can imagine, because that's what he saw.
Murals at the state capitol celebrate more mystical or spiritual planes. In the past few years, new light has literally fallen upon them as restorers here adjusted the spotlights to brighten them. One Albrizio mural at the state capitol was rescued in 1998 from obscurity. It spent decades behind a paneled wall. Others surrounding Huey Long's office were chiseled out by Bulgarian Eisenhower-era decorators.
We've been here steadily for 5 months.
There's an irony here because he's celebrating Louisiana industry in these murals, and some of the pollution is going to decay them, isn't it?
Very interesting point. Yes, it's his own end, yeah.
Elise and Charles Grenier finally finished their work. But don't call it a touching up. They didn't erase anything but nature's damage and our own foolish neglect of an important Louisiana artist. Coming up at number 2 on our list of endangered sites is a personal favorite.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh,
along Bayou Buff, there's an unforgettable sign of peace and constancy. Trinity Church in Cheneyville. Worshippers first gathered under this roof on January 1st, 1861. Caretaker Richard Moriarty.
Everything you see here, with the exception of the floor of the sanctuary, is the original construction of the church.
So the pews, the altar,
yes,
the lighting fixtures even, they used to be gas.
They were kerosene.
But these are the real ones.
They're the original fixtures themselves, chandeliers themselves.
Now that's something. That you got to say that that's just remarkable, 1860.
It is remarkable. It's 140 years old, and it's had a service in this church every Sunday since January 1861.
You're kidding.
Right.
Oh, that's just terrific. That's terrific. You have an upstairs gallery, too. I understand that's where the slaves sat.
Yeah, that's right. We call it the slave gallery. The slaves came with the house servants of the plantation owners who came to the service.
But they came to the same service?
They came to the same service, participated in the service, were an integral part of the service. What a lot of folks don't realize is when the church was first built and Bishop Polk, who consecrated this church, came, there were 12 white and 31 colored who were confirmed at that service. There's another indication in the register of the church where on a Sunday in 1863 there were 51 children, slave children, who were baptized at one day at one of the plantations.
Oh, brothers, let's go down.
The rebels kept a lookout in the bell tower. The Yanks shot across Bayou Buff. There's a bullet hole in the front door. They'll not be taking that out, but overall, Trinity needs some fixing. That's the battle here now, to save a church that witnessed the Civil War, to hold up a quiet landmark that doesn't ask much, only to serve. See, there's not much money coming into the plate now that the congregation, some Sundays, can be counted on one hand.
No, I'm not going anyplace else. Even when we had 2 or 3, 4 Richard and them came, didn't have too many. Sometimes there were 1 or 2 here.
Ruth Stafford tended this Episcopal treasure for 23 years. Do you remember a time when there were a lot of people that came here?
No, I really can't.
Well, you know that he said, wherever 2 or more are gathered in my name.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's not about the number of people, is it?
No, not very many. We keep on going.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way.
2 years ago, we set a rough estimate of $250,000 as a goal.
In the restoration?
In the restoration of the church. And what's really involved there is the fact that the outer courses of brick on the surface were stuccoed back in the late 1800s to try to prevent the moisture from penetrating the brick. The problem that we have now is that stucco is starting to separate from the brick and allowing moisture to come in. That's the big dollar cost, and it's been estimated it's going to cost about $130,000 just to fix that. The other problem are the windows themselves, which are original to the church. The glass is imported from England in 1860 and is no longer available to us. And you'll notice in some of the pink areas particularly, there are white areas which are plain glass that have been placed as glass has been broken. That's going to be a big dollar cost. Quite honestly, I think that the final cost of construction is going to run greater than the $250,000, but we won't know that until the architect gives us some figures.
You've raised $230,000 in about 2 years, and you only have 10 or 20 people at this church?
We have 10 members. We have an average attendance of 18 people on a Sunday.
But you see, that's so remarkable.
It is remarkable because it was raised primarily from amongst individual contributors.
Saving Trinity Church in Cheneyville won't take much more fundraising. The few caretakers here count on 140 years of inclusion and deep community roots to help.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown, good Lord, show me the way.
We'll leave the little church along the bayou to visit another hallowed ground. It's my selection for number 1. For Shreveport historian Gary Joyner, Mansfield has always been a joy to visit.
They're executing their right to dig, to mine, but they are digging on holy ground, on hallowed ground.
But lately, the LSU teacher has found this final resting place for Civil War dead hardly restful.
That's because we're only now truly working on what's called the FEBA, or the forward edge of the battle area. I've just completed it, and that's in the middle. Now there's no trees, there's nothing taller than grass, is where the Union made their final stand on the night of April 8, 1864, and where the Confederates pushed them back across the water, holding the only water for 10 miles, sealing the fate of the Union column to retreat to Pleasant Hill.
The sounds of mining for lignite coal can be heard from the state park here, and less than a mile away, the giant mining operation comes into view. Although the park is protected, it fences only the most contested areas of this war-hallowed ground. Beyond the famous rail fence line, a power company with interest nationwide digs for coal to make electricity. This is one of the world's largest scooping cranes, powerful enough to lift this house-sized bucket and the tens of tons of dirt it can scrape at one time from the hills of DeSoto Parish. Among these hills are 5,000 acres historians call the greater site of the Battle of Mansfield.
They are pushing into the edge of the battlefield itself. They have already destroyed the final phase, the third phase, which is all Union. There are no true Confederate positions in there.
And by destroyed, you mean that
gone.
There
is a giant hole in the ground which has been filled up. You can't save everything. Just because something's old doesn't make it important. It doesn't have a property called historicity. It's historically important. So what you do is you save the most vital areas of each piece.
And you save them in the place they're in,
and
too.
You save them in situ, in the place. Right. And you say, this is it. Nobody touches it. Nobody puts in buildings. Nobody does mining. No taco stands, you know. And the model for that is what happened to Gettysburg.
But that hasn't happened here yet, has it?
It has not happened here yet. And yet, a version of it has, and it's behind me.
There's dispute here over where the edge of the battlefield is?
Yes. And they perfectly, happily chomped up where they said it wasn't, but everybody else knows that it was. When you find artifacts in a place, you got a battle.
Once surrounded by trees, the Allen House stands against a stark backdrop of strip mining. Built around 1840, this was a headquarters and field hospital for Union General Nathaniel Banks, who led the unsuccessful charge up the Red River. He was turned around here in the Confederacy's last victory west of the Mississippi. 50 feet behind the house, the huge bucket churns day and night, stripping 60 feet of dirt from hills that Joyner suspects contain the remains of United States soldiers. Power Company spokesman Scott McLeod.
Restricting development in this area, which would include the Dole Hills mining opportunities, would restrict economic development opportunities for the Mansfield area and surrounding areas, and possibly deny low-cost energy to the customers of this region.
State archaeologist Tom Eubanks.
You'll dig up the interesting things, you'll map it out, you'll get an understanding of its importance. But then the mining still continues.
Right. The National Historic Preservation Act does not stop the project. It affords a certain amount of protection to sites through this data recovery process.
It says, hold on, let me look at this.
Right.
But then you can still mine it.
You can still mine it.
That's our list of endangered sites. There are so many more that aren't getting anyone's attention. This old train depot in Edgard has half collapsed, and no one has means to save it. The most endangered landmarks are the ones like this that we've yet to worry about. Of the 12 we've found today, this is the real symbol of worry, the landmarks we've yet to notice vanishing across the state. The Edgard Depot is at least on the Preservation Alliance's list of most endangered sites. What are you worried about in your neighborhood? Oh, it's locked. But you and I will meet again in our search for lost Louisiana, because I'm sure there are many more castaways that need rescuing on the road ahead.
Mm-hmm.